Marcus Chen pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the cargo hold, feeling the ship's engines vibrate through his spine. The magnetic restraints around his wrists hummed with alien technology, but his mind remained sharp despite 3 days without proper food or water. The Kethmori had taken him during what should have been a routine diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim colonies. His transport ship never stood a chance against their massive dreadnought. Most of his crew was dead now, scattered across the void in tiny pieces of twisted metal and frozen atmosphere. But Marcus was alive. That alone told him something important about his captor's intentions. The cargo bay doors hissed open, flooding the space with harsh purple light. 3 Kethmori warriors entered, their scaled reptilian forms towering nearly 8 feet tall. Their leader, distinguished by the golden crest running down his skull, approached with deliberate steps that echoed through the chamber. "Human," the alien spoke through a translation device that rendered his words in cold, mechanical English. "You have been selected for the great honor of facing the Drakthul in the sacred arena." Marcus had heard whispers about the Drakthul during his years serving in Earth's diplomatic corps. Ancient creatures the Kethmori revered as living gods, beings of immense power and territorial rage. The aliens believed that feeding prisoners to these creatures would bring favor from their war deities. "How lucky for me," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. He had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged bullies, whether they were human or alien. The golden-crested Kethmori studied him with yellow eyes. "You show no terror, human. Perhaps you do not understand your fate." "I understand perfectly," Marcus said. "You're going to throw me into a pit with something nasty and watch it tear me apart. Very original." The alien leader made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species amuses us with their arrogance. The Drakthul has consumed over 300 warriors from a dozen different worlds. Each one believed they would be the exception. Maybe they just weren't trying hard enough." This time the Kethmori definitely laughed, a harsh grating sound like metal scraping against stone. "We shall see how long your defiance lasts when you face the God Beast." The warriors escorted Marcus through corridors lined with viewing ports, showing the vast darkness of space. The ship was massive, easily the size of a small city. Strange symbols covered every surface, glowing with the same purple light he'd seen in the cargo bay. They passed other prisoners in the corridors, beings from various species he didn't recognize. Most were clearly terrified, some weeping, others staring into space with the blank expressions of those who had given up hope entirely. None looked like they possessed any fighting ability. That struck Marcus as odd. If the Kethmori wanted their dragon god to have challenging prey, why choose such weak specimens? Unless the point wasn't to provide a challenge, but to provide entertainment through helpless slaughter. The corridors eventually opened into a massive amphitheater carved from what appeared to be a single piece of black stone. Thousands of Kethmori filled the seats, their scales gleaming under artificial suns suspended from the ceiling. The noise was incredible, a combination of roaring, hissing, and chittering that made Marcus's ears ring. At the center of the amphitheater lay a circular arena perhaps 200 yards in diameter. The floor was covered in sand that had been stained dark red by countless previous battles. Scattered throughout were the bleached bones of various creatures, some disturbingly humanoid. "Behold the sacred arena," the golden-crested leader said. "Here the Drakthul decides who is worthy to join the ancestors and who deserves only to feed the earth." Marcus was pushed toward a platform that began descending into the arena. As it moved, he got his first clear view of the crowd. The Kethmori were worked into a frenzy, stamping their feet and making that metallic laughing sound. This was clearly a popular form of entertainment. The platform touched down on the sand, and Marcus stepped off. The metal grate immediately rose back up, leaving him alone in the center of the arena. The noise from the crowd became even louder, and he could smell something in the air that reminded him of sulfur mixed with rotting meat. A massive gate on the far side of the arena began to grind open with the sound of ancient machinery. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. What emerged from the darkness beyond the gate defied Marcus's expectations entirely. The Drakthul was indeed dragon-like, but not in any way that would have seemed familiar to someone who grew up with Earth legends. It moved on 6 legs, each ending in claws the size of sword blades. Its body was covered in natural armor that looked like overlapping metal plates, and wings stretched from its shoulders that could have covered a football field. But it was the creature's head that truly commanded attention. 3 skulls merged into one grotesque whole, each mouth filled with teeth designed for ripping flesh from bone. 6 eyes glowed with intelligence that suggested this was no mere animal, but something that understood exactly what was happening. The Drakthul emerged fully from its tunnel and stood surveying the arena. When its gaze fell on Marcus, all 6 eyes focused on him with predatory interest. The creature was easily 40 feet long and stood nearly 20 feet high at the shoulder. Marcus had faced dangerous situations before during his diplomatic career. He'd survived assassination attempts, terrorist attacks, and even a brief war on the Centauri colonies. But he had never faced anything like this. The crowd erupted into cheering again as the Drakthul began its approach. It moved with surprising grace for something so large, each step calculated and purposeful. Marcus could see intelligence in those burning eyes, the kind of cunning that made truly dangerous predators. He began backing away, not out of fear, but to buy himself time to think. The arena walls were smooth stone, rising nearly 50 feet. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The scattered bones on the ground would make poor weapons against something this size. The Drakthul stopped about 30 yards away and tilted its 3 heads, studying him like a cat studying a mouse. Then it opened all 3 mouths and released a roar that shook the entire amphitheater. The sound was like standing next to a rocket engine. Marcus felt it in his bones, in his teeth, in the marrow of his spine. Several weaker spectators in the crowd actually fell from their seats. When the roar ended, the creature began stalking forward again. Marcus reached down and picked up a femur bone from some long-dead victim. It was better than nothing, though not by much. The Drakthul saw this action and made a sound that might have been amusement. "Come on, then," Marcus said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." The Drakthul charged. It moved faster than anything that size had any right to move, covering the distance between them in seconds. Marcus threw himself to the side, rolling across the sand as massive claws raked the ground where he'd been standing. He came up running, the bone club still in his hand. The creature spun to follow him, its 3 heads tracking his movement independently. This was going to be a very short fight unless he found some advantage. The Drakthul lunged again, this time leading with its center head. Marcus dove between the creature's front legs, sliding across the sand beneath its belly. He swung the bone club upward as hard as he could, aiming for what he hoped might be a vulnerable spot. The bone shattered against the creature's armor plating without leaving so much as a scratch. Marcus rolled out from beneath the Drakthul just as it tried to slam its body down to crush him. He scrambled to his feet and backed away again, now weaponless. The crowd was going wild. This was lasting longer than most fights, which apparently made it more entertaining. The Drakthul turned to face him again, and Marcus noticed something he'd missed before. Along the creature's neck, just behind the leftmost head, was a small section where the armor plates didn't quite overlap properly. It was maybe 6 inches of exposed flesh, barely visible unless you were looking from exactly the right angle. It wasn't much, but it was something. The creature advanced more slowly this time, having learned that the human was quicker than he appeared. All 6 eyes remained fixed on Marcus as it approached. Marcus began circling to his left, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He needed the Drakthul to think he was simply trying to delay the inevitable. The creature followed his movement but didn't rush, content to let him exhaust himself. When Marcus was positioned at precisely the right angle, he stopped circling and faced the creature directly. The exposed spot on its neck was now visible, though still barely the size of his fist. The Drakthul interpreted his stillness as surrender and moved in for the kill. All three heads dove toward him simultaneously. Marcus waited until the last possible second, then moved. But instead of diving away like he had before, he leaped forward, directly at the creature's attack. His timing was perfect, slipping past the snapping jaws to land against the Drakthul's neck. His fingers found the exposed flesh, and he drove his thumb as deep into the wound as possible. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Drakthul's roar of pain echoed through the arena as it reared back, trying to shake him loose. But Marcus held on, using his military training to maintain his grip even as the creature thrashed. Blood began flowing from the wound, and the Drakthul's movements became more frantic. Marcus pressed his advantage, working his fingers deeper into the creature's flesh. The crowd had fallen silent, unable to believe what they were seeing. The Drakthul slammed against the arena wall, trying to crush the human against the stone. But Marcus had anticipated this, releasing his grip at the last second and dropping to the sand below. The creature spun around, now bleeding heavily from its neck wound. Its 6 eyes blazed with fury, and something else Marcus hadn't expected: respect. For the first time since entering the arena, Marcus allowed himself to hope he might survive this. The Drakthul was wounded, and its movement had become less coordinated. But the fight was far from over. The Drakthul's blood painted the arena sand in dark, crimson streams. The wound on its neck wasn't fatal, but it had definitely gotten the creature's attention. The alien dragon god circled Marcus more cautiously now, all 6 eyes tracking his every movement with newfound wariness. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of the creature's blood across his skin. His diplomatic training had never covered fighting 40-foot alien death machines, but his other education was proving surprisingly relevant. The crowd remained eerily quiet. This wasn't how these fights typically went. Most victims lasted 30 seconds at best before becoming the Drakthul's next meal. Marcus had now been in the arena for nearly 10 minutes and had actually wounded their sacred beast. He could see confusion rippling through the Keth Mori spectators. Some were leaning forward in their seats, suddenly invested in the outcome. Others were making what sounded like nervous, chittering sounds. The golden-crested leader who had escorted Marcus to the arena was standing at the edge of his viewing box, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. This was clearly not going according to their usual script. Marcus took advantage of the lull to study his opponent more carefully. The Drakthul was magnificent in its alien deadliness, but it was also showing signs of fatigue. The blood loss was affecting its coordination, and its breathing had become more labored. More importantly, Marcus was beginning to understand how the creature moved. Its 3 heads operated semi-independently, but they shared the same nervous system. When he had wounded the neck behind the left head, all 3 had reacted with identical pain responses. The creature's armor was indeed nearly impenetrable, but there were other weak points if you knew where to look. The joints where the legs met the body showed thin lines of exposed flesh. The wing membranes, while tough, would be vulnerable to puncture wounds. And those 6 eyes, burning with alien intelligence, had no armor protection at all. The Drakthul finished its assessment of this strange new threat and began advancing again. This time it moved with deliberate patience, no longer treating Marcus as easy prey. Marcus backed away slowly, scanning the arena floor for anything useful. Most of the scattered bones were too small or too brittle to serve as effective weapons. But near the far wall, he spotted something that made his pulse quicken. A long, curved rib bone from some massive creature, nearly as tall as Marcus himself. One end had been broken off, leaving a jagged point that looked sharp enough to penetrate flesh. The problem was reaching it. The bone lay almost directly opposite his current position, and the Drakthul stood between him and his improvised spear. Marcus began moving laterally, forcing the creature to rotate to keep him in sight. The Drakthul's neck wound was on its left side, which made turning in that direction more painful. Marcus used this to his advantage, consistently moving left and forcing the creature to aggravate its injury. Each turn brought a fresh flow of blood from the wound. The Drakthul was definitely weakening, though it remained incredibly dangerous. When Marcus was positioned correctly, he broke into a sprint toward the bone spear. The Drakthul reacted instantly, charging to intercept him. The race was close. Marcus reached the bone a split second before the creature's massive claws would have shredded him. He snatched up the makeshift weapon and rolled to the side as the Drakthul's bulk slammed into the arena wall. The impact shook the entire amphitheater. Dust and small pieces of stone rained down from the ceiling. The creature had hit hard enough to crack the wall, demonstrating just how much power it possessed. But the collision had also disoriented the Drakthul. It shook its three heads, clearly dazed by the impact. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted forward and drove his bone spear into the creature's right front leg, aiming for the joint where the limb connected to the body. The pointed tip punched through the exposed flesh, and the Drakthul roared in agony. It tried to swipe at Marcus with its wounded leg, but the pain made its movements clumsy and slow. Marcus pulled the spear free and danced back out of range. The creature was now bleeding from 2 wounds, and its right front leg could no longer support its full weight. The crowd was becoming agitated. What had begun as routine entertainment was turning into something unprecedented. Some Kethmori were standing in their seats, while others were pointing and making excited chittering sounds. Marcus could hear fragments of their translated conversation drifting down to the arena floor. "Impossible," one voice said. "No prey has ever wounded the Drakthul twice." "This human fights like a warrior born," said another. "How can this be?" "Perhaps the creature grows weak with age," suggested a third, though the speaker sounded doubtful. The golden-crested leader was now conferring urgently with other high-ranking Kethmori. Marcus couldn't make out their words, but their body language suggested serious concern. The Drakthul limped around to face him again. Its 6 eyes burned with renewed fury, but also with something Marcus was beginning to recognize as grudging respect. The creature was intelligent enough to understand that it faced no ordinary opponent. Blood dripped steadily from both wounds now, staining the sand in an expanding circle around the creature's feet. The Drakthul was clearly in pain, but it was far from defeated. If anything, the wounds seemed to have made it more dangerous. The creature was no longer treating this as a game or a feeding session. Now it was fighting for its life, and that desperation made it unpredictable. The Drakthul began stalking forward again, but this time it moved differently. Instead of relying on brute force and speed, it was now using strategy. The 3 heads moved independently, scanning for threats from multiple angles simultaneously. Marcus recognized the change immediately. The creature had stopped seeing him as prey and started seeing him as a rival predator. The realization sent a chill down his spine. If the Drakthul was truly intelligent enough for tactical thinking, then his small advantages in speed and agility wouldn't be enough. The creature would adapt and learn from each exchange. He needed to end this quickly before the alien dragon god figured out how to counter his tactics effectively. Marcus began circling again, keeping his improvised spear between himself and the creature. The bone weapon was sturdy enough to punch through unarmored flesh, but it wouldn't last long against the Drakthul's natural armor plating. The creature matched his movement, but more slowly now. The wounded leg was hampering its mobility, and the blood loss was taking its toll. Dark red drops fell steadily to the sand with each step. Marcus feinted left, then broke right, trying to reach the creature's injured side, But the Drakthul anticipated the move, swinging its massive tail around to block his approach. The tail struck Marcus in the ribs, sending him flying across the arena. He hit the sand hard and rolled several times before coming to rest against a pile of old bones. Pain exploded through his torso. At least 2 ribs were cracked, possibly broken. Blood filled his mouth, and each breath sent spikes of agony through his chest. But he was still alive, and he still held his spear. The crowd erupted into excited chittering. Finally, their sacred beast was showing its true power. This brief entertainment was nearly over. Marcus forced himself to his feet, spitting blood onto the sand. The Drakthul was already moving toward him, sensing victory. But as the creature approached, Marcus noticed something that changed everything. During their extended battle, the creature's blood had been flowing freely from its wounds. But alien blood, it turned out, had different properties than human blood. Where the Drakthul's crimson drops had fallen, the sand was beginning to smoke. The blood was acidic enough to dissolve stone. Marcus looked down at his bone spear and saw that the tip was now coated with the creature's blood from his previous attacks. The acidic properties were already eating into the bone, making it sharper and more deadly than before. A new plan began forming in his mind. It was desperate and probably suicidal, but it was his best chance. The Drakthul was only 20 yards away now, moving with renewed confidence. The creature could smell his blood and see his obvious injuries. In its mind, the human was finished. Marcus gripped his dissolving spear and prepared for one final gambit. As the creature came within range, Marcus did something that shocked everyone watching, including the Drakthul itself. Instead of trying to dodge or retreat, he charged directly at the massive predator, bone spear aimed at its central head. The Drakthul was so surprised by the suicidal attack that it hesitated for a crucial half-second. That hesitation was all Marcus needed. He leaped high, using every ounce of strength in his legs to propel himself upward. The acidic tip of his spear struck one of the creature's central eyes with a wet, satisfying pop. The Drakthul's scream of agony shattered the air. The sound was so intense that several Kethmori spectators collapsed, clutching their ears in pain. Marcus landed on the creature's neck, his hands finding purchase in the natural ridges between armor plates. The Drakthul thrashed wildly, trying to shake him loose, but he held on with desperate strength. The bone spear was still embedded in the creature's eye socket, the acidic blood eating deeper into the wound with each second. The Drakthul's movements became increasingly frantic as pain overwhelmed its nervous system. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. Using the embedded spear as an anchor, he swung around to reach the creature's neck wound from his earlier attack. The gash was still bleeding heavily, and now Marcus could see deeper into the alien anatomy. There, just beneath a thin layer of muscle tissue, pulsed a large blood vessel that looked remarkably like an artery. Marcus didn't hesitate. He drove his fingers into the wound and grabbed the pulsing vessel with both hands. Then he pulled as hard as he could. The Drakthul's death scream echoed through the amphitheater as its lifeblood began fountaining across the arena sand. The creature collapsed to its knees, then fell sideways with a crash that shook the entire structure. Marcus rolled clear just as the massive body hit the ground. He lay in the bloody sand, gasping for breath and clutching his broken ribs. The arena fell completely silent. 40,000 Kethmori stared in absolute disbelief at the impossible scene before them. Their sacred Drakthul, the unkillable god-beast that had devoured hundreds of warriors from across the galaxy, lay dead in the arena, killed by a single, unarmed human. The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute before the first Kethmori found his voice. "The Drakthul is dead," came a whispered translation from somewhere in the crowd. The words rippled through the amphitheater like a shockwave. Marcus struggled to his feet, using the Drakthul's massive corpse for support. Blood from his broken ribs stained his shirt, and every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. But he was alive, which was more than anyone had expected 5 minutes ago. The golden-crested leader was the first to break from his stunned trance. He leaped down from the viewing box, bypassing the platform entirely, and landed heavily on the arena sand. Other high-ranking Keth Mori quickly followed. "Impossible," the leader breathed, approaching the massive corpse with reverent steps. "The sacred beast has been slain." Marcus wiped blood from his mouth and studied the approaching aliens. He could see fear in their yellow eyes now, mixed with something that might have been awe. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically in the span of a few minutes. "Your sacred beast," Marcus said, his voice hoarse but steady, "was just a very large predator, nothing more." The leader's head snapped toward him. "You speak blasphemy, human. The Drakthul was a living god, blessed by the war spirits of our ancestors." "Your ancestors had good taste in guard dogs," Marcus replied. "But gods don't bleed, gods don't die, and gods definitely don't fall to simple anatomy lessons." More Keth Mori were dropping into the arena now, surrounding both Marcus and the fallen creature. Their weapons were drawn, but none seemed eager to approach the human who had just accomplished the impossible. "What are you?" the leader demanded. No mere diplomat could achieve such a feat. Marcus smiled, despite the pain in his ribs. "You're right. I'm not just a diplomat." The truth was something he had never shared with his current assignment handlers. His diplomatic credentials were real, but they were also a cover for his primary role in Earth's expansion into alien space. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said, straightening to his full height. "Former gunnery sergeant, Earth Marine Special Forces, veteran of the Titan Insurrection, the Proxima Rebellion, and the Shadow War in the Vega system. Current operative for the Office of Xenological Intelligence." The Keth Mori exchanged nervous glances. Even in their isolated corner of the galaxy, they had heard whispers about human military capabilities. "Before I became a diplomat," Marcus continued, "I spent 12 years learning how to kill things that wanted to kill me. Your Drakthul was impressive, but it was also predictable. Every predator has the same basic weaknesses, regardless of what planet it comes from." The leader's crest darkened with what Marcus had learned was a sign of extreme agitation. "You are a spy." "I'm a scout," Marcus corrected. "Sent to evaluate whether the Keth Mori Empire represents a threat to human expansion in this sector." The admission sent another wave of chittering through the crowd. Several warriors raised their weapons, but their leader gestured for them to hold fire. "And what?" the golden-crested alien asked slowly. "Is your evaluation?" Marcus looked around the arena, taking in the thousands of staring faces, the impressive architecture, the advanced technology. Then his gaze returned to the Drakthul's corpse. "You're technologically advanced," he said. "Your ships are well built. Your society seems stable. But you've made one critical error in judgment." "Which is?" "You assumed that because humans are smaller and softer than most species, we must be weak." Marcus began walking slowly around the dead creature, his words carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. Every Keth Mori strained to hear what he would say next. "Humans evolved on a death world," he continued. "Our planet tried to kill us with predators, diseases, natural disasters, and toxic environments for millions of years. We survived by becoming the most adaptable, most persistent, and most ruthlessly effective killers in known space." He stopped and placed a hand on one of the Drakthul's massive claws. "Your sacred beast would have been considered a moderate threat on my homeworld. We have ocean predators twice this size. We have land animals that could tear through its armor like paper. We have insects whose venom could drop this creature in seconds." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on his every word. "But more than that," Marcus said, "we learned to fight each other. For thousands of years, humans perfected the art of warfare against opponents who thought exactly like us, who could anticipate our strategies, who shared our intelligence and determination. He looked directly at the golden-crested leader. Your Drakthul was a magnificent animal, but it was still just an animal. It relied on instinct, on size, on natural weapons. I've fought thinking opponents armed with plasma rifles and orbital bombardment platforms. Marcus began walking toward the arena wall, and the crowd of Kethmori warriors parted before him like water. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. You're going to return me to my ship, you're going to release any other prisoners you're holding, and you're going to send a formal apology to the Earth Diplomatic Corps for this unprovoked attack. The leader's crest flared with indignation. You make demands of us? You are still our prisoner, regardless of this anomaly. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the alien. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried an edge that made several warriors take involuntary steps backward. Am I? The simple question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind the leader's yellow eyes. One human had just killed their most sacred and feared creature, using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical knowledge. What would happen if the Kethmori had to face an entire army of such beings? Besides, Marcus added, pulling something from his pocket, you might want to consider the broader implications of your actions. The object in his hand was small and innocuous-looking, barely the size of a coin. But when he activated it, a holographic display materialized in the air above the arena. The image showed a star chart of the local sector, with dozens of systems marked in blue light. Each marking represented a human colony, research station, or military outpost. Earth has been expanding in this direction for the past 50 years, Marcus explained. We've established permanent settlements in 37 systems within 100 light years of your homeworld. He manipulated the display, and new markers appeared in red. These showed the positions of Earth's deep space monitoring stations, automated defense platforms, and patrol routes. We've been watching you, he said simply. Every ship movement, every military exercise, every expansion of your territory. We know your fleet strengths, your weapon capabilities, and your strategic weaknesses. The golden-crested leader stared at the display in growing horror. The red markers completely surrounded Kethmori space, forming a web of surveillance and potential threat that they had never suspected existed. You have been studying us? The alien asked. Standard procedure when we encounter a new spacefaring species, Marcus replied. We watch, we learn, we prepare. The diplomatic mission that brought me here was designed to make formal contact, assuming you prove to be a peaceful civilization. He gestured toward the arena around them. Clearly, we were overly optimistic. More Kethmori had gathered now, including what appeared to be senior military commanders and government officials. Marcus could hear fragments of urgent conversations in their native language. One particularly large warrior, his scales scarred by what looked like countless battles, approached the golden-crested leader. Commander Vexhai, he said through the translation system, if the humans have been watching us this closely without our knowledge, what else might they be capable of? Commander Vexhai's crest darkened further. What do you propose, War Leader Kethmor? I propose we discover exactly how dangerous these humans truly are before we make any irreversible decisions. Marcus listened to this exchange with growing amusement. The Kethmori were beginning to understand the reality of their situation. They had captured what they thought was a helpless diplomat and discovered they had been poking a sleeping predator. If I may offer a suggestion, he interjected, there's an easier way to handle this situation. All eyes turned to him. Which is, Vexhai asked. Let me complete my original mission. I was sent here to evaluate the possibility of peaceful relations between our species. Despite this unfortunate misunderstanding, that's still possible. Marcus deactivated the holographic display and pocketed the device. Earth doesn't want another war. We've had enough of those. But we also won't tolerate attacks on our citizens or attempts to expand into systems we've already claimed." He looked around the arena, meeting the gaze of every Kethmori leader present. "The choice is yours. We can be neighbors, trading partners, maybe even allies, or we can be enemies." "And if we choose the latter?" War Leader Kethmor asked. Marcus smiled, and there was no warmth in the expression. "Then you'll discover why every other species in this part of the galaxy has decided that fighting humans isn't worth the cost." The implication was clear enough that even the proud Kethmori warriors shifted uncomfortably. Several were staring at the Drakthul's corpse with new understanding. Commander Vexhai was clearly struggling with the decision. His species had built their entire culture around strength and conquest. Backing down from a fight went against every instinct they possessed. But the evidence was undeniable. If one human could kill their most fearsome creature using improvised weapons and tactical knowledge, what would happen when faced with humans who came prepared for war? "What terms do you propose?" he asked finally. "Simple," Marcus replied. "Establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Open trade negotiations. Respect the boundaries we've already established in this sector. In return, we'll share some of our technology, provide mutual defense agreements, and help you expand into unclaimed systems beyond our sphere of influence." It was a generous offer, more than the Kethmori had any right to expect after attacking a diplomatic vessel. But Marcus understood the value of turning potential enemies into allies. "And if we agree to these terms," Vexhai said slowly, "will Earth overlook this incident?" "Diplomatic immunity has its privileges," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Accidents happen in space. Communications get garbled. Sometimes species make first contact under less than ideal circumstances." Relief was visible in the alien commander's posture. "We accept your proposal, human Marcus Chen." Marcus nodded. "Excellent. Now, if you could arrange medical attention for my ribs and transportation back to my ship, we can begin working out the details." As Kethmori medics hurried to tend his injuries, Marcus took one last look at the Drakthul's corpse. The creature had been magnificent in its own way, a perfect example of evolution's most successful predator design. But evolution had its limits. Intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to use any advantage, no matter how small, would always triumph over brute force and instinct. The crowd began dispersing as news of the diplomatic agreement spread through the ship. Many Kethmori stopped to stare at Marcus as they passed, their yellow eyes filled with a mixture of respect and wariness. Word would spread quickly through their empire about the human who had killed their sacred beast with his bare hands. Some would see it as a cautionary tale about underestimating other species. Others would view it as proof that humans might make valuable allies. Either way, the galaxy had just become a much more interesting place. As the medics finished their work and began escorting him toward the arena exit, Marcus heard Commander Vexhai addressing his subordinates. "Let this be a lesson," the alien leader said. "Never assume that smaller means weaker. Never assume that different means inferior. And never, ever underestimate a species that has survived long enough to reach the stars." Marcus smiled to himself as they left the arena. His mission had been to evaluate Kethmori intentions and capabilities. Instead, he had ended up teaching them the most important lesson any species could learn about humanity. Humans were far more dangerous than they appeared. But they were also capable of being the most valuable allies in the galaxy, if treated with proper respect. The Kethmori had chosen wisely. Not every species was smart enough to recognize when they were outmatched. But then again, not every species had to learn that lesson by feeding their gods to a human diplomat, armed with nothing but improvised weapons and a lifetime of hard-earned experience. The galaxy was about to discover what humanity was truly capable of. Marcus could hardly wait to see how that revelation would change the balance of power among the stars.